I'm Kevin Boyle. I joined Fitch about 2 years ago from a wealth management background. So I'd worked with Barclays Wealth and I'd worked with Coutts as a banker. And I joined at a point where the organization was benefiting from a lot of the work that Rob Thacker, who you, if you're not aware of yet, I'm sure you will be, who runs the professional qualifications business, where we'd service the wealth management industry primarily because of RDR. And over the last 2 years, we've built out the wealth management offering. And I'm going to take the opportunity just to give you an idea of the sorts of things that we're now covering, the most recent developments, and some of the ideas that you may be interested in. So I'm going to look at the things which are still driving the majority of the business. I'm also going to take a brief look at some of the newer areas that we're being asked to cover by our clients, and some of the things which are coming next. Okay. Now, if you're flicking through the pack, you can see a short test. Don't worry about the test. Okay. I'll come to the test in a few moments, and there is a reason for that when we come to it. So, what do? As I said, you're probably familiar with Fitch with regard to the professional qualifications, and all of you will be aware of RDR, and so with RDR comes the CPD offering. And related to that is the need, the requirement to make sure that people are recorded doing their CPD. So we've got three key legs there of the offering here at Fitch Learning: CPD, professional quals, and the technology platform. But that's now complemented as well by some pretty high level, very good quality technical product knowledge, all the way through to some of you will be familiar with the certificate in quantitative finance. So we service some of the very complex area on investment management, some of the structured product side. And we also now cover professional skills. So we've got a good team of ex-practitioners like myself who've worked with private clients, who work with our clients on the professional skills area. So we've got the full package, if you like, the full complement. The professional qualifications area, we continue to invest in. So we have recognized that our clients want us to look at things like the mortgage advice certificate. We now cover that. And we've also pushed to the higher level in terms of the qualification, so the Chartered Wealth Manager qualification, which reflects our continued investment, our approach to responding to our clients' needs. Because to a large extent, we do this when our clients say, we want you to move into a particular area. So for instance, the CWM paper, we responded to our clients, we built up the capability, and we now are one of 2 providers in that area. I think so, yeah. In addition, you'll notice, I don't know if you can just make it out, the Premier Training Provider stamp from the CISI. Now, I asked Rob, there must be about 50,000 organizations who have that particular stamp. He said, no, that's not the case. He said, we're the only provider currently to have the Premier Training Provider stamp from the CISI of about 72, I think, so 72 organizations. There are quite a lot of organizations out there who've got the Training Provider accreditation, but not the Premier. And that's based on client feedback, delegate feedback. It's based upon them assessing our capabilities in the classroom, outside the classroom, and critically, I suppose, our pass rates. So if you want to know more about these things, Aoife in the corner, I know her picture graces the Chartered Wealth Manager brochure. So if you want to know more about that, you can catch Aoife later on. Okay? You're stuck here until 2 o'clock, Aoife, okay? You can't sneak out. There's no free lunch. Where we do it, we operate on a global basis. So we provide CISI and regulatory training in Singapore, Hong Kong, Dubai, and UK. But we also carry out the professional skills training literally globally. So all the way from west coast of the USA, all the way through the east coast of Australia. The lucky guys get to go to Australia. Okay. The reason why I'm mentioning that is, one, we've got the capability to deliver on a global basis. So some of our clients are global wealth managers, and we need to be able to deliver consistently in each jurisdiction. But from the point of view of this audience, and particularly your interest in the regulatory side, it means we are able to say, well, yeah, we can compare and contrast what's happening in Singapore and Hong Kong and the developments there, and Zurich, and in London in particular. And I know that for some clients that's very important. Fortunately, most of these jurisdictions take the lead from London. So because we're based here, we're able to then correspondingly turn around to our clients in Singapore and say, well, we know what's happening in the UK. We know you're going to be following similar sort of route. We can provide advice accordingly. Okay, this is the quiz, okay? This is the interactive bit. Now, this is a test some of you may have come across, okay? If you're well read. Even if you're not well read, you may have come across it as well. I'm going to ask these questions for a very good reason, which I'll explain in a few minutes. So I'm going to ask you 3 questions. I'd like you to use a pen to write down the answer. This is genuinely not a test of intelligence. There are right answers, but I just want to see how you get on with this. If you've seen this before, fine, write down the answers. If you've not, we're going to give you 30 seconds starting from now. If you can't get it quickly, guess. That's way more than 30 seconds, but I'm going to give you another 15, okay, if you've not yet completed it. Okay, guess if you haven't got it yet. Everyone done it? Okay, good. Okay, Chris Brown, who's at the back, went to school at one of the best schools in the country. I know this because my son goes to a rival school in Gloucester. So Chris, you're a grammar school boy. What did you get?
I haven't got the question.
Okay, so you got as far as question 1. So the answer to question 1 is 5p. Yeah. So the answer to question 1 is 5p. So £1 and 5p for the bat. 5p for the ball. That gives you £1.10. I suspect quite a lot of you said 10p. Okay. If you did, good. That means you're normal. Second question. What did you get? Chris, what did you get?
I didn't make that.
You didn't make it that far, okay? That's the definition of stupid, I'm afraid, okay? Did you put 5 minutes down? If you did, that's the right answer. If you put something else down, good, that's normal. Okay, a lot of you probably put down 100, perhaps. Okay, maybe something else. And then finally, the answer is 47. Okay. I'm sure some of you put down 24, perhaps, or something else. Okay, hands up if you got all 3 right. Good. We have a normal room. Hands up if you got 2 right. Okay. Hands up if you got 1 right. Okay. Hands up if you got none right. Those of you put your hands up for none right, good. You're normal. Now you've seen the answer, you think, oh, that's pretty easy. And it is easy. I asked my 13-year-old daughter to do this, and she did it really quickly. So what was the point of all that? The point of all that is it ties in with one of the key changes we're seeing, certainly on the professional skills side. So the training drivers we're seeing, still the main driver of the business we're doing is it's still regulatory. I suppose the dynamic there is that we're now working with clients to prove people are doing the training and it's actually affecting people's behaviors. So we spend quite a lot of time writing case studies which people can then take later on to prove that they've put it into effect. Okay, so it's no longer just a tick test. In terms of the professional skills side, we're asked more and more to help on the advice side. How do good advisors give good advice? And that's the purpose of that little test we've just done. So we introduce quite a lot of behavioral finance into our work now. If you're going to advise a private client, you have to understand how dumb most people are when they make decisions, which is what you've just illustrated. It's just, you're just normal. We don't tend to make very important decisions using logic. We tend to use something called heuristics. We use our first impression, quick rule of thumb to answer a question. What's really scary is that investors tend to do that in practice. Private clients do it. High net worth individuals do it. So if we teach bankers, if we teach advisors how it is that their clients make decisions, that helps enormously. So we do quite a lot of work on that now. We also get asked to prove the effectiveness of the work, so working with clients on ROI. And then in terms of the next step, what we're just seeing is changes in the way in which we train, and we primarily train relationship managers or credit advisors or wealth managers and investment advisors. So up until fairly recently, the model's really been just throw a lot of training at the RM. Okay? Teach the RM how to be better to pitch the organization, be better qualified, make sure that they know how to ask questions, answer, and provide advice. And for some time, certainly as a banker myself, I was like, well, how effective is that? Do you actually change your behaviors? My colleagues at Fitch took bets on whether or not I'd introduce this photograph. And I have, and it's not gratuitous, it's there for a reason. This is the Leckhampton Rovers reserves team. Okay. We're not even the first team. Okay. We won the Gloucestershire Cup this year, and we won the league. Okay. The first team didn't get anywhere, and the reason for that is we had an excellent team leader. Okay. A really good quality team leader. Okay. I would have used another team like Brazil, but that would have been inappropriate, obviously. Now, the reason why I mention this is probably the most interesting thing we're currently working on. We're working with 2 global clients trying to train RMs and make them more effective on their assistants, but doing it by really just focusing on the team leaders. Because it's the team leaders who can change behaviors. So we're providing them with resource so that they can take away the training later on. We can train the trainer, provide them with technical resource, feedback, follow-up, a portal which they can use in order to change the behaviors that we wanted recognized. Okay. That's just a taste of some of the things we're currently covering. If you do want to talk about those things in more detail, you'll catch us after Ian. But I'm going to leave you now with Ian Cornwall, who's going to talk and give some idea of some of the developments, changes that are happening in the world of TNC.
I did 80 presentations on the RDR a couple of years ago, some with CZ. And I was in Glasgow, and I've been compliance director for at least half the room in Glasgow, and not for the other half. And I made a statement I often made in compliance, and probably you do in training as well, that no one's ever gone bust underestimating the intelligence of an investment manager. And half the room roared, and the other half growled. So I have to be careful what I say now. WMA, many of you in this room are members of it. Some of you aren't. Why not? But in case you want a quick heads up, we've got about 120 members who employ about 30,000 staff in about 550 offices in UK, Ireland and the Channel Islands, look after about 600 billion and look after about 4 million consumers. We've got about 60 associate members, law firms such as, I don't know, Herbert Smith's, Speechley Bertram, accountancy firms such as KPMG and Deloitte, some various people that are genuinely interested in the sector. So that's who we are, and we spend a lot of time on regulation, and I spend all my life on regulation, and I spend most of my time in handling the relationship with the FCA and the Treasury, and increasingly I'm now allowed out in Europe. My colleague handles Europe in terms of the relationship because my diplomatic skills aren't renowned in Europe, but I was in Paris yesterday, so I spent most of Monday on Eurostar and a fair chunk of Tuesday night, but I did get to my hotel room at 9 o'clock on Monday, as opposed to one of my colleagues who got there at 10 to 2 in the morning. So, and we then had to delight the whole day in Paris, sitting in a dungeon, listening to the European Securities and Markets Authority take questions on level 2 of MiFID from 9 o'clock to 5 o'clock. Life doesn't get any better than that, does it? Anyway, we're here to talk about training. I'll talk a little about the regulatory scene because I think, you know, Our business at the moment is very much about managing change. In the first year of FCA's operations, we reckon our compliance guys had to read 3,324 pages. That's must-reads, not nice-reads. So not your speeches, not your final notices, things you need to read in order to do your day job. And we reckon to date, at the end of June, it's 642 pages. So he's got this regulatory sausage machine at Canary Wharf churning out stuff all the time. I should realise this is my fourth presentation in 4 days, so I've got to remember you're not journalists, and I've got to remember you're not 400 compliance guys who want to know what I'm going to be doing next year. So if I stray, you'll have to correct me. I think engagement under FCA has improved very much. So we engage a lot with them. They talk to us pre-policy. They tell us what they're going to do by way of thematic reviews. But FCA is a huge organisation. They look after 70,000 firms now. All these credit guys, you know, there's some motor dealer in Scunthorpe that gives you a bit of credit. It's now regulated by FCA. So it's a huge organisation to manage. They've got an executive of 6, and their agenda's obviously, you know, driven by the next Libre or the next leak they've inadvertently made on insurance to the press, which is going to cost apparently 1.7 in legal fees, and they've had to hire their own PR advisors. But hey, the industry will pick it up. And the FCA are beginning to understand our sector. There's now a dedicated wealth management sector. In Europe, we've got a tsunami of directives. All my firms are either provide discretionary advice and/or are members of the London Stock Exchange, so or an exchange. So as such, they're subject to the delights of MiFID, and they're subject to the delights of CRD4, so or maybe 3. But it's a tsunami of regulation coming out of Europe, and Europe's a totally different ballgame. They don't engage. They turn out stuff, and then you try and figure out what the hell you're meant to do, and it's very political. So most of the drafting we're worrying about at the moment, some of this stuff's all been drafted by politicians. It's a bit like me sitting on the committee for olive oil growers and drafting the rules to them. You know, if you're the man from Estonia, it's fair to say your knowledge of the London financial market is probably not that deep. And I think in terms of the history, if you take T&C, I think I'm probably the only one old enough in the room that can remember T&C coming in for FSA in the late 90s, when we were really worried about the impact of T&C and what this competence mean. And we thought we'd be and we were really worried about the exposure. I mean, all those debates about, you know, who's going to sign off that this person's competent. Well, compliance are. No, they ain't, pal. They don't work for me. You're going to sign them off. What do you mean? Yeah, but you're now in the frame. And this whole area of, we thought we'd see a lot more, we more or less thought every final notice would sort of kick the supervisor and blame them as well. And we really didn't see that. So all the things we were worrying about in 2000, to some extent, didn't come to fruition. And then, so T&C was sort of a bit on the back board, and then RDR came on the scene, and all of a sudden it raised its head again, and you had the pleasure of telling that 50-year-old plus fart who'd never done an exam, yes, he really has got to do an exam in order to do business. And obviously you're trainers, so you're not, you're unlike compliance guys, you take no pleasure in bayoneting the wounded, but I suspect some of the conversations on a wet Friday afternoon could be quite amusing, so you got them all through. And then we had the CP that said, in effect, discretionary managers will need a qualification as well, and that sort of got quietly dropped. I still think, by the way, most of your discretionary managers probably are caught by the RDR and probably have got qualifications, because they occasionally inadvertently give advice on investments, therefore they're caught in professionalism. But if you have got any pure grandfathered discretionary managers who you reckon aren't subject to the RDR, I would strongly recommend you go back and look at the grandfathering rules, particularly if you've inherited them from other firms, because you're meant to know what their competencies were in the year 2000 in order to get grandfathered through, and you need to. And what did you actually ask by way of references when that person came across to you by way of grandfathering to identify what those competencies were? So that, I think, is a bit of a potential minefield for you. If you that's my little nugget. That's my one compliance tip for the day, probably. That's what sort of lurks in the back of my mind. And then RDR came, and and I'll talk a little bit about the infrastructure there. And then we've got some changes, and Europe will have a little bit of impact on training, not qualifications, and I'll talk a little bit about that. So that's sort of the history lesson, that's sort of where I think we are. And I think generally our sector, the feedback I get from our sector on the WMA is, by and large, A large proportion of them are level 7, not level 4, because typically the graduates came in and did the diploma. Competencies vary from firm to firm, but some firms certainly won't let people lose just on the basis they've got qualifications. CPD schemes generally up and running, and not quite often the benchmarks are higher than the RDR requirements. So that's sort of a bit of a heads up as to how I see it. So accredited body, I think the accredited body itself has bedded down. I think people get it. CESE is the one I speak to most. I sit on the committee at CESE that has oversight as the role of an accredited body. And I guess there's various changes to come, such as online SBS and stuff. I think one of the issues that has and continues to emerge from time to time is the distinction between someone being competent and someone having the qualifications, a point I mentioned just earlier. Certainly in my old firm, we wouldn't let anybody be a discretionary manager and right until they had 10 years experience. Certainly it's on a number of occasions when I do have discussions with certain firms, and even with the regulator on occasion, I think there's often a muddle between the rules governing competency, which is left to the firm to decide, and the rules governing what qualifications require for certain rules. So if you look, there's no rules in the T&C about competency in terms of FCA setting the standards. That's down to the firm. There's certain rules about what qualifications people need to do in order to perform a role, but then it's your judgment. So I think one of the old Regi Reps exams, do you remember that? The old General Regi Rep exam? No? Well, it used to be an exam you had to sit, and that actually gave the right to do derivatives as well. So you get people generally wondering, one's going to say, you know, now I've got the exam on, do some pork belly futures for Aunt Agatha. Oh no, you don't. So actually clear about what your competency levels are quite important. I guess it's maybe a bit of a red herring, but the RDR requires you to have 35 hours, 21 structure, whatever it is. You probably know better than I do. But I think there's a distinction between CPD that's relevant to the RDR requirements and CPD that's not relevant to the RDR requirement. So if you've got someone that's an advisor and discretionary manager and they go on a course, for example, looking at the fiduciary duties of discretionary manager, and that's not CPD that's relevant for their role as an advisory manager in the RDR. So you need to make sure in terms of the RDR CPD that it's relevant to their role as an RDR advisor. Most CPD they do almost certainly will cover both. So if you're getting an update, I don't know, on developments in the investment trust market, my guess is you're learning that because you might, as much as to help you in your personal recommendations on an advisory basis as you are in terms of your decision to trade as a discretionary manager. So a lot of the CPD overlaps, but occasionally you just need to make sure that your RDR guys don't trip themselves up by counting non-RDR CPD for the purpose of the RDR. And in terms of CPD relevant to the individual roles, we get some hugely odd requests from people that have attended functions at the WMA for CPD. And I don't know how some of it's relevant to their role. You know, I came to our AGM. Yeah, okay, fine, we can confirm you came to the AGM. But whether that's relevant to their role, I don't know. And we know that the FCA has focused more on increasing focus on learning outcomes. That's some of the feedback they gave to the accredited bodies about 9 months ago, and I think CESE mentioned that in some of the roadshows they did about 6 months ago. Yeah. So focus on learning outcomes is something you need to just be aware of. This is a common problem, and this does get very muddled, but I think people need very clear about what obligations apply to the individual and what obligations apply to the firm. So the responsibility to get an SPS rests with the individual, but there's certain rules that rest with the firm which require the individual to waive the SPS at you. And it sort of all gets merged in the day-to-day admin, but when you've got a problem, I think it's very important there's absolute clarity as to where responsibility begins and ends. And one of the problems you've also got is the rules that apply to an accredited body in many instances also apply to you as a firm in your own right. So, and I think that often gets forgotten. There are quite a lot of rules in the T&C that apply to you as a firm. which is worth a refresher. I think so far there's been a limited number of disciplinary cases around the SBS. I think CII had one. Some guy fraudulent SPS application. Well, that's a good night Vienna job, really, isn't it? And the key thing to note is the accredited body supervises their members. They don't supervise firms. I think people have certainly initially gotten a muddle with that. FCA supervise firms, and they also supervise individuals where they're a control function. And that environment is designed, can cause real muddle, and particularly when it goes pear-shaped. So who's responsible for what when a control function is subject to discipline? Is it the accredited body? If it's FCA, I think the jury's still out on that. And I think we've yet to have sort of cases, you know, somebody goes shoplifting in Marks and Sparks is quite simple, but if you've got I think it's unclear at what stage the accredited body gets involved with discipline and what stage an FCA does. And also there's certain things that an accredited body I would suggest could perhaps take disciplinary action when FCA may not, because they've got the accredited body's got a code of ethical standards. So for example, I'm thinking of what would be a scenario where FOS has rejected a suitability complaint but still awarded some sort of an amount of money because the investment manager has been plain rude to the client. I don't think lawyers have got cute yet, but I could see a scenario where complaints about the individual's behaviour get sent to their accredited body, not just a FOS. And the other thing that I think from a firm's perspective you need to be very aware of, and I apologise if I'm telling you to suck eggs, but if you have any issues on this whole area of accredited bodies or T&C, which involves potential disciplinary action against an individual in terms of meeting your regulatory obligations, then you need to get employment advice as well, because employment law is not necessarily consistent with regulatory law. Lawyers love these sort of cases from our sector because they can charge you from an employment law and a regulatory law. It's double bubble. But it's absolutely the case that you do have to, that you can have real problems trying to reconcile some of your regulatory obligations with your employment law obligations when it goes messy. So that's something that you know, hopefully it won't, but if it does, you need to make sure that you're thinking about both sides of the equation, and HR aren't working in isolation of the people that understand the regulatory obligations and vice versa. The other thing that I think can get blurred is your authority to release information on individuals to the accredited body, because the assumption again is, oh, they're a regulator. But I think you need to check, if CI ring up or CZ ring up and ask for information about an individual, what's your authority at law to release information on that individual? In some cases it may be because they've actually signed a document releasing it into their accredited body. In other cases you may have it in a contract of employment. But I think it's an area where you need to be totally clear, if you are asked for information on an individual, what your authority is to actually release it. Because again, I think because of the blurring and people not understanding the authorised body, not a regulator, there certainly was some confusion at the time of the implementation, exactly when things can and can't be released to a third party. So that's something you may wish to check. In terms of European directives, CRD4, which for those of you who don't know is the Capital Requirements Directive that came on the 1st of January. About half of you are members of WMA, probably a bit more than that. We're about to update our Q&A on CRD4, which you'll be pleased to know we're not talking about numbers, but it's talking about the corporate governance provisions which came into place on the 1st of January. So, for example, if you're subject to CRD4, that specifically mentions induction and training for your board members. I think one of the areas where I think firms are pretty weak on is actually having, if I wander in, what is your T&C arrangement for your board and non-executive directors? What's your induction programme for a new director appointed to a board or a non-executive director? So I think there's been greater focus and inclusion on training board members, including non-execs, and that's an area where I think firms historically have not been very good at. So you may wish to review in terms of T&C, in terms of where it does apply, making sure how you actually pick up your senior players. And I think that's an area which in terms of a forecast from me, is an area where I think that you're going to see increasing focus. In terms of Europe, I don't think you'll see anything coming out of Europe that relates to qualifications, because it's just a minefield as a topic in its own right, not just in terms of financial services. So, you know, there's no way that anybody other than a German actuary is going to be allowed to practice in Germany. The Scottish lawyers will be, well, maybe the independent lawyers. No, they're part of Europe after September. Anyway, but the Scottish lawyers will, you know, be very careful about what allowing other people in. So qualifications is not something that Europe wants to tackle, but training is. And I've been, as I said earlier, spending my life the last 3 or 4 weeks, and will do for the next 3, looking at the proposals coming out of Europe, which will impact on your businesses from the 3rd of January 2017, in terms of them being implemented, but will impact in terms of your business big time from about the latter half of 2015 and 2016, when you've got a myriad of IT projects to implement and changes to things like suitability and God knows what. There are actually 1 or 2 areas where training is mentioned in these rules. Again, we'll be producing material to help firms through that. Oddly enough, in some quite odd areas, so you'll find reference to training in some of the proposals, for example, in respect of telephone recording of conversations, which is a slightly odd place to find it. So there is odd things coming out of Europe that we'll pick up. Banking standards review, that's the Richard Lambert's thing. I suspect you know more about that than I do. I've seen the sort of FCA response, which indicated business as normal as far as I could see. I guess what we're trying to work out, representing investment firms, is how the proposal impacts on FCA and professional bodies and investment firms that are part of a banking group. So if you work for Coutts or you work for Barclays Wealth, will Lambert effectively do a drill down into your area of the business? And if it does, what are the implications for your area of business? I know the questions, I don't know the answers, but that gives you some feel for our thinking. I've already bored you about mentioning the grandfathering for discretionary managers. Exam syllabus, the responsibility for exam syllabus shifted to FCA about 2 or 3 years ago. I'm looking at Fitch when I say this, but and they were meant to review them on a regular basis and haven't done so. So I don't know when the next review is. The team that looks after it, I know, has been swamped responding to the Lambert review. It's small. The team changed at the beginning of January this year. They were also responsible for the corporate governance range of CRD4, and that was like drawing teeth trying to get an engagement with them. So they're pretty tied up. So I don't know on exam syllabus, I don't know where we are on it and when the next review is going to take place. In terms of the regulatory resource, it's a big ask, and of course at some stage someone's going to point out to them that they took over this responsibility and never actually updated the syllabus. So I think there's an exposure for FCA as an organisation there as people pick up on it.